so many hearings to keep track of, multiple hearings on Facebook's Libra, antitrust hearings, and a Google-specific hearing. Give us a preview of what we can expect with all of these.
Well, we're working hard to bring it all to you. So one of the things that I've been looking at, maybe we'll start with the Google-specific hearing, is this rising chorus that there is anti-conservative bias by the major social media companies. You saw that in the White House summit last week, and I think you're going to see it, or, you know, it's the focus of this hearing that is going to be held by Senator Ted Cruz. You just had a request coming from Senator Cruz and Senator Hawley that the FTC even look into how these companies are basically doing content moderation, that they study that amid these concerns of bias. So you have that. And then, of course, you said we're going to have the antitrust hearing. So I expect a lot of talk about the nature of competition and whether it's stifling. But I also expect a lot of talk about startups, venture capital. You know, do you start a company just so you can expect to be acquired, or because you think it's a really great idea that needs to be out there in the world that you're going to lead into the future? All of those kinds of questions, those are the ones that I expect to be dueling in different parts of the House tomorrow.
Meantime, Charlotte, you've got this fine from the FTC that came down on Friday. As far as we know, the FTC planning to fine Facebook $5 billion in a record privacy settlement, and yet you've got lawmakers like David Cicilline saying this is just a slap on the wrist. He called it a Christmas present a few months early. Does the fine matter?
So the fine matters, but it doesn't matter nearly as much as the behavioral restrictions that the FTC places on Facebook as part of this settlement. And we have so far not received information about what those restrictions will be, but that's really what I think could affect Facebook going forward. Clearly, the fine is not having a big impact on them.
Meantime, Ben, the Treasury Secretary really taking aim at Facebook and Libra and the broader crypto industry in general. Take a listen to another portion of Mnuchin's remarks today.
This is indeed a national security issue. The United States has been at the forefront of regulating entities that provide cryptocurrency. We will not allow digital asset service providers to operate in the shadows and will not tolerate the use of the cryptocurrencies in support of illicit activities.
Meantime, Facebook's David Marcus, the co-creator of Facebook's cryptocurrency project, Libra, submitted his testimony, his written testimony that he plans to read tomorrow at the hearing. He says, "I believe that if America does not lead innovation in the digital currency and payments area, others will. If we fail to act, we could soon see a digital currency controlled by others whose values are dramatically different." Ben, there's a little bit of fear-mongering here. Do you think this argument will work with lawmakers that if we don't do it, somebody else will?
I think on this issue, lawmakers are not really going to be swayed. You know, there are some allusions to, you know, if we don't do it, China will fill in the space or Russia will fill in the space. And occasionally that will kind of work on the Hill. But I think there is a feeling here in Washington, D.C. that Facebook in particular has not been responsive to the concerns, has not, you know, gone and sought what they need to know, even if they had the meetings, that they didn't get actually the kinds of regulations and the kinds of approvals that they needed. And they kind of went out with this splashy announcement and didn't necessarily, you know, do the work beforehand. And I think that there is a lot of concern about the company that we're seeing in all of these hearings. And when you have that level of concern, you can't just wave it off and say, trust us, generally in Washington.
We've heard Sheryl Sandberg, the COO of Facebook, invoke the same argument when talking about antitrust more broadly, saying, well, China isn't going to break up Chinese tech companies. Charlotte, as someone who used to work at the FTC, how are the agencies going to feel about that particular argument, given that the FTC has been assigned oversight of a potential antitrust investigation into Facebook should such an investigation happen?
So I think the antitrust enforcers recognize that competition is the best way for these companies to be effective and be strong competitors against companies in other countries. We do not do the national champions thing in the United States. We have competitive markets, and the antitrust agencies are tasked with making that happen.
So, Ben, what are we expecting in terms of a result from these hearings this week? Let's talk about this House antitrust hearing in particular. How will this move the ball in one direction or another?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, this hearing is one in a series. The first one looked at the impact of the big platforms on news. This one is looking at entrepreneurship. I could see other ones coming down, maybe with small companies that have complained about some of these big companies and how they affect their work and startup culture. So I think that's the question. When you talk to the lawmakers, when you talk to David Cicilline, the chairman of the committee, and you say, what do you think is really going to come out about this? He says, look, I don't know. It's difficult to know until we figure out what the problem is, what the solution is going to be. But he has sort of leaned in the direction of saying, there is bipartisan concern, and maybe we could move some laws forward. And some of the folks that I've been talking to say that they may be interested in doing just that. You tweak how mergers are looked at, or what they cost to be examined by the FTC. Those sorts of things can really actually change the competitive landscape, even though they're kind of little. And that might be something that the committee is looking to do.
So the question then, Charlotte, is in what direction is the ball going to go? I mean, some of these are shorter-term sentiment issues, and then of course, an antitrust investigation by the FTC could take 5 or 10 years if such an investigation happens. So what do you see happening over the shorter term versus the longer term?
Right. So I think the role of the congressional investigation here is really important because antitrust can take a long time and these markets move quickly. So what I'm looking for from the congressional investigation is building a record for legislation that maybe actually could happen more quickly than these antitrust investigations, and certainly more quickly than future antitrust investigations.
So, Ben, after this week, then what is next?
Then Congress goes into recess, and then basically the 2020 campaign starts up. And I think that's important to realize here because a lot of the congressional work, people here in Washington say, basically kind of goes on hold after this recess. And I think that's why you're kind of seeing a flurry of activity right now, because people want to get things into the record. That's not to say they can't pick them up in the fall and try to advance them. But right now is kind of the moment that you have to seize the public's imagination and make your case. And if you can get that out, then yeah, maybe you can advance things in September, October, November. If you can't do that, then things might die. So when you're asking questions about antitrust, about controversial content, about privacy, about anti-conservative bias, about all these things that tech is facing in Congress, the question is which of them can kind of rise above in the next few weeks, and that's what I'm watching.